When I say the word missionary, what immediately comes to your mind?
Today on GoCast.
This is GoCast.
When I say the word missionary, what immediately comes to your mind?
Do you think of someone who is preaching on a soapbox, dressed in old clothes? What do you think of when you think of a missionary?
For a long time, when I was asked that question, I imagined some guy out in the bush in Africa living in a mud hut. That was it. It was not at all. It's sometimes, here's what it is. I'll tell you. When I was younger, I used to, and even now, used to watch the movie The Color Purple. Have you ever seen The Color Purple?
I have never seen The Color Purple. I know Oprah's in it.
Well, now I doubt everything about you. No, I mean, The Color Purple, it's got some elements that maybe not for everybody, but they have one couple that are formerly lived in poverty and got married, and they moved to Africa and became missionaries. And every time that picture conjures up part of that is it's one of the main character sisters. So I think about that, and I think about the guy living in the mud hut in Africa. That's what I think of. That's what I thought of for a year.
Well, first of all, we want to welcome everyone to GoCast. This is our first podcast, episode 1. This is the origin of something amazing for the missions community around the world. At least that's what we're hoping for.
That's awful grandiose.
That is awful grandiose. It is. But we're believing for that. We're praying for that. GoCast is a show. It's produced by missionaries. Chris and I are missionaries with an agency called Go to Nations. It means that we will discuss a lot of different topics, but ultimately everything is going to come down to missions and our call to reach the world.
Sometimes we may talk about happenings in the world. We may be talking about hot topics. There's all kinds of things, but really what we're going to see that comes through is because we are missionaries, because we have this view of the world through the scope of missions. It's all going to circle around, and it's all going to come back to that and how we view the world through the filter of world evangelism. Okay,
so a worldview, that's kind of a buzzword these days. What's your worldview? But really, the word worldview, it's really a view. It's a view of the world. It's like, okay, how do we look at the world around us? How do we relate to the world around us? And then it's also a view for the world. So it's like, what do we believe should ultimately happen in our world? What's our vision for the world? And so, what we really hope that's going to, come out of this is that hopefully lives are going to be affected. Maybe we'll think a little bit differently. And, ultimately we just want to have the view that God has of the world. If we can kind of get our minds and hearts in alignment with the way He sees things, then maybe like our daily lives will be a little bit different. Maybe even our trajectory in life will end up being a little bit different.
Yeah, it's all about engendering deeper thought. Even at times that we're laughing and joking and having a good time, we really want to see everybody think deeper. That we want to help. We want to help not only ask the question but answer it as what more is there in life? What more could I be doing? So really that's among other things, that's what we really want to see with this.
So what will it look like? What is GoCast going to look like when you tune into our podcast? We want it to be chock full of relevant information. There's a gap we found if you look at, podcast world. Certainly there's other great, missions podcast content. But what we want to bring to the table is we want to communicate relevant information, help us to understand what's really going on around the world, hopefully within in the glasses of, biblical Christianity. What does God say about what's going on? And then compelling interviews. We have over 900 cross-cultural workers and missionaries around the world. So what might be happening in their neck of the woods, so to speak? So we've got a lot of great, compelling interviews with just some great world changers coming up. Also, a variety of segments. We like, Chris and I, we love to have fun. And so this is not going to be completely, it's not going to be completely serious all the time. It will be chock full of some random segments. Sometimes we might even come up with a segment on the fly without provocation. So just be prepared for that. So what's our GoCast really about? Why do we do GoCast? What prompted this? What do you think, Chris?
Well, the thing is we want it to be a conversation. We want it to be conversational. And as we are conversing and talking about these relevant world issues, what's going on in the United States, what's going on around the world, as we're talking about, and we don't want it to ever be preachy, and there might be times for the two of us, since we are preachers, that it may come across like that. But this is not any kind of pulpit or anything. It's really for us to have a discussion and bring our listeners in where they feel like they're part of the discussion. They may not be jumping in and saying something, but it's a discussion. It's times where we may disagree, we may agree. Who really knows? So that's really what we're driving toward, is a discussion happening. It's how do we, through iron sharpens iron kind of talk, push everybody and ourselves forward.
Okay. Another thing we might find in our GoCast are things like definitions. There is a really big, huge misunderstanding about what missionary life really is like. In our opening, what does a missionary look like? What is when I say the word missionary, what visual image first comes to your mind? And even understanding that whole word, missionary, how do we really define that? There's a lot of recent books. Pioneers came out with a great book just recently called When Everything is Missions. And we'll dive into that in a little bit later show. So what's our why? What's the motivation behind this particular podcast? Of all the podcasts you could be listening to, there's some great podcasts. Chris and I love listening to a lot of random, various shows, a lot of random various podcasts. But this one, we want it to be unique. So why are we doing this podcast? Because there are so many misconceptions about missions that abound in our churches, abound in our culture. Back to our initial question, what do you think about when you think of the word missionary? What do you think about when you think of the word missions? In some churches, only the pastor's on staff. We send them out. They are the only ones that seem to have a role in the Great Commission. Some people think that, missions is just, we're paying for them to take a vacation. Have you ever heard that before?
Well, with what I do in missions, I hear that a lot, and there's various reasons for that. I think a lot of that's just misunderstanding. We hear, "Am I just paying for somebody's vacation?" Or the other one that we hear along with that frequently is, "Well, why would you go all the way over there when there's people in our own backyard that need help?"
Right. Okay, yeah, good. So 90% of churches, I've been told, don't really have a missions plan. Now we didn't go out, Chris and I, and survey all the churches in existence. But it's been said that there are a majority of churches that maybe they do missions, but it's not really done in a focused, strategic way. And there are a lot of frustrated believers sitting in the seats of churches like around the world, longing and knowing that there's something more than this. They're struggling everywhere to find their purpose. They're not connected with it. And so that's our why. That's kind of our mission with this podcast, is that we want to see, those people that have not been connected with their call. We'd love to see that connected in a greater way. Because we also want to answer the question, what is missions life? What is it like to be a missionary? What is life like overseas? And that's really where our interviews are going to come in. And I'm very excited about that. So anything you want to add to that one?
When we start talking about missions life, just a real quick personal experiences. It's been 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago now, that my wife and I started doing missions. And the first time we went on a short-term mission, we went to the Middle East, and I had this preconceived notion of how a missionary lived, or what it was going to be like to be around them. And the first home of a missionary I walked into, what was really surprising to me? They had a couch, and they had a TV, and they had all of these things. And you know what? They weren't living in adjunct poverty. They were still, they still, like I said, still had a couch. They had air conditioning in their house. It was the craziest thing.
Did they have a cow, like their own personal cow?
They had a cat. So not really a cat, and you can't milk a cat. It's weird.
You can't. No.
So you can milk a cow, but not a cat. So it was really eye opening for me because of my perception of what missions life would be.
It was another in a long line of hot, humid evenings, and we were on a medical mission in a tribal village in northern India. The host pastor introduced us to a young couple. A year earlier, Ranjit and Preeti were led to Christ by our evangelism team and began attending the church our ministry had built in a tribal village nearby. The only believers in their tiny village, they had suffered persecution from their neighbors. One day, news spread that a young village woman had given birth. Soon, joy in the village turned to sadness. The baby was a girl. This child was the firstborn, so they had wanted a boy, as did all families in India. The young couple could not afford to feed an unwanted child. They would do what many had done, cast her into the river and try again for a male baby. Upon hearing this news, Ranjit and Preeti ran to the young couple's hut. They told the new parents that they would take the child and raise her as their own. They begged the couple not to kill their newborn infant. The couple was shocked. Ranjit and Preeti, too, were very poor and had 5 children of their own to feed. Preeti explained that Jesus teaches that all life is precious, and they would love the child just as Jesus loves them. The couple shook their heads, placed the baby in Preeti's arms, and told them to leave. The evening of our medical mission, baby Sweeta was sleeping peacefully at the entrance to the church. The gospel of Jesus Christ has the power to save lives of little Indian baby girls. This is a true story from Sindoni, India, as told by Bob and Kim, Go-To Nations missionaries. Pray for persecuted Christians around the world, that their faith may remain strong as a shining light for Christ's love in their communities. Thank the Father for the precious gift of life He has given us as He ransoms the lost, abused, poor, and unwanted from the power of death.
What I kind of want to talk about is just like this. We get this whole huge discussion in our country, and it really plays out in social media more than anything else, about immigration.
You said the word.
It's a scary conversation, right?
It's a scary conversation.
Well, and I'm thinking as we go through this and the what we want to do with this podcast and how we want to approach it is, how do we as missionaries approach this? What in the world do we do with it as Christians and missionaries, and how do we approach it?
Yeah, let me make a point there. So, regardless of where you stand on that issue of immigration, I mean, it certainly is a hot topic politically, and we do see it all over social media. The truth is that, we want to somehow for a second, let's kind of get out of, political land. And for a second, let's kind of get maybe, without being super spiritual here, but let's maybe get above that and say, okay, well, again, view of the world. What does God see about this? What does God think about this? Is there something that supersedes my own nationalism, let's even say? Right. So, anyway.
And so, this conversation isn't to have an argument.
Although I would love that if we could. Okay, sorry.
and it isn't for us to say we are this side or that side. What we want to know, there's look, you see things on the internet, you never know if it's true. But one person that I know put something on the internet that's supposed to be a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Look,
I know this quote.
Look, if he never said this, it's not my fault because I'm not the first to say it. I'm just saying I read this. And even if it's not him, it's just a good thing to say. And someone asked, was asking according to this, asking, do you want to be on the right side or the wrong side? And Abraham Lincoln's response was, I want to be on the good side, on God's side. I don't want to be on the right side or the wrong side. I want to be on God's side. And, whether or not he said that, the essence of that thought is what we're driving at here. I don't care if I'm on the good side or the bad side. I care if I'm on God's side. I want to have a God view. I want to have a God opinion. I want to have an opinion that is pleasing to the Lord and uplifts him, makes his name famous in the nations.
So what do you think his opinion is of this whole issue here?
Well, we could go through, the scriptures don't have the word immigrant or immigration in them. Right. Because they use different sorts of words then.
Right.
And, but you see a lot of times, especially in the Old Testament, and you do find it in the New Testament as well, but you do find the word foreigner or sojourner. A lot of times those are intertwined. And I could explain it all, but you know what? It's a great tool and really easy. Man, just pull out a Strong's Concordance and look at it, and it'll give you the Greek, it'll give you the Hebrew. And if you could even find, the numbers in the Strong's, you could type it into Google.
Sorry. What? I have to interrupt with a story. Okay. So we were in Ukraine. This was earlier this year. This was in January. And a Nigerian missionary who is living in Ukraine. I mean, he is an evangelist like nobody's business. He's so awesome. And he had met a friend of mine 20 years prior. And this friend of mine, who's also an evangelist, gave this guy, Nigerian living in Ukraine, a gift. Okay? And so he told me to tell my friend when I saw him, he said, hey, go back and tell your friend. He said, thank you for the strong coconuts. And I'm like, what did you say? He said, yes, tell him thank you for the strong coconuts. And I'm thinking, we do live in Florida. Okay, coconuts, would my friend bring him coconuts? And what is it? What's a strong coconut? So we got into it talking about it. And what he meant was a Strong's Concordance.
What's funny is that, to me, what I pulled out of that is every good missionary has stories that start off with, I was in such and such country. You said, I was in Ukraine. I mean, there's times I've told stories. I was in Pakistan. I was in Burkina Faso, West Africa. It's funny to me how our stories always start, I was here. But anyway,
or maybe I was trying to use the bathroom in blank. And that's always a challenge.
Right.
So anyway.
We could talk about that one. Maybe in a future
later.
podcast we'll talk about that. So, but no, so... you could take the Strong's Concordance. It'll give you the little number by the word. You could even Google that number, Strong's Concordance 5381, and it'll pull it up, and it'll give it's really, really cool. So even if you're afraid to read, Google will do the work for you. So, but I'm saying all that to say, if we kind of look through for these words and try to understand what they mean, and what we get a greater understanding of what the Lord's trying to tell us and how to approach it. So one of my favorite verses that mentions the foreigner is Numbers 15:15. And it says, the community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreigner residing among you. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. And that's interesting, that word foreigner, when you study it out, it really is talking about somebody who's staying temporarily. They're not there forever. It gives the idea of a transient person, someone who's emigrating.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a fancy word that we say diaspora.
Right.
And what that is that's just somebody who's moving from one place to another. They're an immigrant. And the Lord calls us right here in this scripture that we are to be good to them, that the same rules for us that for us apply to them, and that it's a lasting ordinance. An ordinance means a rule. It's a lasting rule.
Right.
The rule is we treat them the same as we treat ourselves, and that the Lord looks at them the same as He looks at us.
Okay.
That's an interesting thing.
So treating the foreigner, as we're talking about here, and kind of biblical nomenclature, treating the foreigner like we treat ourselves, that sounds very gospel-esque, right? Right. Love our neighbor as we love ourselves. I mean, so that's like the general, and didn't Jesus say, the whole law is summed up in these 2 commandments, right? And one was love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and the other one is love your neighbor as yourself. So that's the same message, right?
It is. And I understand that Numbers 15:15 is an Old Testament scripture, and some will argue, well, that was written to the Jews, and it was, but that doesn't mean it doesn't apply to us. But let's take it even further. You mentioned the Gospels. There's this great story found in the Gospels. It's in Luke chapter 10. Great story. It's
so
the
wait,
Good
I'm a
Samaritan.
Gentile, so this whole concept must not apply to me because I'm not Jewish.
Okay, if you want to go with that, you can be wrong. So,
Okay, so what is the story?
So the story that we're talking about is it's the parable of the Good Samaritan, and we often teach this and look at this as being nice to people. We're called to be good to people. Isn't that a good thing? To be just like the Good Samaritan. Right. But it has deeper meanings. It has implication for exactly what we're talking about today. See, the Samaritans, we could talk along about the Jews and the Samaritans and how the Samaritans were considered a lesser class because they were only half Jewish and half human. Yes, half human and half cat. It was really weird. But no, they're half Jewish and half Gentile. Right. So there was some So discussion there on how to approach them, and we unfortunately I could go on and on, but that's not really what we're driving at today. Here's what we're driving at: is we see that a Jewish man, and Jesus told this story, and when you really go to it with an understanding of what Jesus was trying to explain, it has some really interesting nuances. It has some interesting implications.
Especially for this issue.
Exactly. Yeah. On what Jesus was outright portraying and then what he was modeling, what he was not saying. What he said was important, what he didn't say was important. So it tells the story of a Jewish man that was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he got robbed. And I love in the New Living Translation, it says that he was robbed, they took his clothes, they beat him up, and it says they left him half dead. They beat him to the point that he was left half dead beside the road. And a priest came,
Jewish priest,
Jewish of all Jews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Came along and saw him and didn't just ignore him, crossed to the other side of the road, so he wouldn't be defiled. So he'd still be as holy as he could be.
Because the man was half dead.
That's right, and he couldn't touch him because of that. And then a temple assistant walked over, looked at him laying there, and then just continued to walk. Didn't do anything for him. But a Samaritan, this person who is quote unquote not holy enough, right? Jesus talks about a Samaritan saw him, and this is what the Samaritan did. It was crazy. He took olive oil and he took wine and he soothed and washed his wounds. Because the alcohol in the wine would have cleansed him. Yeah, it would have burned, but it would have cleansed him. And then he bandaged him. And then the Samaritan went a step further, and he put the man on his own donkey. which then he was saying at that point that what's happening with this man's more important than me right now, because the important person rode the donkey, right? And he put him on the donkey and took him to an inn, and he took care of him. Then he had to go, and he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins and told him, look, I'll come back, but just take care of this guy. And if we spend more money than this, just let me know and I'll pay you when I come back.
So like today, it would be like, okay, here's my credit card number. If there's anything else incurred on that,
just take care of this guy.
Take care of it.
Just
yeah.
take care of this guy. And see, Jesus says, and I love this, Jesus says, now which of these would you'd say was a better neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? And those around him said, the one who showed mercy. And Jesus said, yeah, now go do the same thing.
Now go do the same. So think about that. So doesn't that answer the question, who is my neighbor? Because these immigrants coming in, are these my neighbor? You know, are they my neighbor according to
looking at this story? If we apply this story to our current situation, I would say absolutely. Here's the thing for me is when we talk about immigration, and I'm not talking anything political. I'm not giving my political opinion. But when we talk about immigration, and we've got all of these immigrants coming from all over the world, Jeremy, this is the greatest missions opportunity we've ever had in our lives.
In the United States.
Yeah.
Right.
They're coming to us. Right. They're coming where we live. And we have the opportunity. We have the opportunity. And that's key. Not as much obligation, because I think it is an obligation, but an opportunity. God is serving it up on a silver platter to us. But an opportunity to say, you know what? I know you don't understand anything that's happening in our culture. I know you don't know how to speak our language. I know you don't know how to shop in our stores or know what anything means. But God, I believe God brought you here for me to tell you that Jesus loves you and demonstrate Christ to those people. I mean, isn't that an amazing opportunity?
That's challenging. That is an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing opportunity. But here's the pushback, is that if we only see through our political lenses, then I fear that could be a little bit of a detriment, or at least maybe a hindrance to us loving the immigrant neighbors among us, the refugees. I mean, you know, even on the street, this wasn't purposeful, but even on the street of our world headquarters here in Jacksonville, Florida, there's a whole school for immigrants just right up the road that we've gone into that school and we've got relationship there, which is awesome. But I mean, it's refugees, especially currently right now. I mean, immigrants that were forcibly, you know, either they just had to go. They had to take their families at the risk of their own lives. I mean, these people are here in our communities. And, you know, are we going to be annoyed by that? Are we going to be, are we going to, you know, somehow look at that or if I can just be real here, are we thinking, oh, well, what about my property values? You know, what about, you know, my own, how does they're taking our jobs, you know, when I go to Walmart and I see a foreigner that's working, well, shouldn't an American have this job? I mean, what rises up in our own hearts? I think, honestly, the parable of the Good Samaritan kind of puts a microscope on our hearts, doesn't it? And helps us to think, okay, what is our thought about the foreigner living among us? Are we just oh, well, you know what, everyone here needs to speak English. I'm all for speaking English. I'm all for that. I'm all for, you know, moving into our culture, learning the language of that culture. I'm all about that. But are we going to let anger and that prejudice keep us back from the opportunity that God has just sovereignly put before us? You know,
I had a conversation similar to this with somebody once, and they gave all of these reasons, talked about safety and talked about that. And, you know, I've got a wife and a daughter, and they were like, well, what about their safety, and what if, you know, things happen to them? And, you know, I said something off the cuff, and it almost sounded flippant or a Sunday school answer. But the truth is, and this is what it is for me, I trust God. I trust him. And I trust that this is all part of his ultimate plan as the sovereign of the universe. He's God.
Right.
And I'm looking at it saying, all right, God, What are you doing? And see, I think that's the greater question here, is we see this happening. All right, God, you're in control, and I believe you are. What are you doing? And then the next question after what are you doing is, what do I do in response to
Right,
it?
exactly. That's a good place to leave it off today.
Mhm.
You're really good at this, right? Well, first of all, you're really good at talking with no script, and then you're also really good at coming up with a nugget, all right? So what's our nugget for today? What's our big takeaway?
You know,
Is it go hug a foreigner? Should I just go right up? I mean,
that might be more effective than hugging a tree.
it would definitely be more effective than hugging a tree. It may be offensive, but anyway, go ahead.
But, really, when we break down everything that we've talked about today, we talked about my journey in missions, your journey in missions. We talked about what do we do with immigration, and really it's summed up in this thing is no matter where God has you, where He's got you in this place, where you are on what I call your Jesus journey, it's trust Him. Trust God. Know that He's good, and in that goodness, He is worthy of your trust to say, God, I may not understand. I may not totally get it, but I trust you, and where do I get in?
Awesome. Okay. So let that be kind of food for thought, in your whole missions journey and your whole, it is absolutely true that as a believer in Christ, that we've got a global call, right? That every single believer has a role to play in what Jesus gave as His Great Commission, right? And so just like that, think about that. Think about that this week. Think about that over this next few months here. What is God calling me to do? Does He have a greater mission? Does He have a greater plan for me than my little world? I don't know. We've got to break out of that, don't we?
That's right.
We hope you enjoyed our first episode of GoCast. We're so excited about what these next podcasts are going to hold. You can reach out to us by emailing GoCast, that's GOCAST, at GoToNations, GOTONATIONS.org. That's a spelling bee right there.
That's right.
And a nugget. We appreciate you guys.
GoCast is the official podcast of Go2Nations, a mission sending agency reaching the Americas, Eurasia, Africa, and Southeast Asia with missions opportunities available now. Want to know more? Check out our website at go2nations.org.
Next time on GoCast.
So then, and Jeremy, I was in this cycle for something like 17 or 19 years of, I can't because of this or because of that. And then the Lord brought back somebody that had been in my life for many, many years. They were missionaries, had lived in the Middle East and came back to the U.S. And we had this discussion. And next thing I know, I'm on a plane going to the Middle East. And I'd been on airplanes a lot, but I had never been outside of the United States. So we talking about jumping feet first, we went to a country where we can't legally spread the gospel, and that's what we're doing.
And that was your first
That was
mission?
our first short-term